Long before the black dresses, the moon-shaped necklaces, and the unmistakable sound of her voice, Stevie Nicks was a young woman carrying a guitar through a series of unfamiliar cities. She was born Stephanie Lynn Nicks on May 26, 1948, in Phoenix, Arizona. Her father's career required the family to move repeatedly, taking them through places such as Albuquerque, El Paso, Salt Lake City, Los Angeles, and the San Francisco Bay Area. Every time Stevie began to feel settled, another house and another school were waiting. Music became the one thing she could take with her. Her grandfather, A.J. Nicks, had been a country singer, and he began teaching her songs when she was still a little girl. Stevie's mother filled the home with fairy tales, while her grandfather showed her what it felt like to sing for another person. Those two influences remained with her, stories that seemed almost magical, and music that could make them feel real. When Stevie received a guitar for her 16th birthday, she wrote a song almost immediately. She called it, "I've Loved and I've Lost, and I'm Sad but Not Blue." The title sounded surprisingly mature for a teenager, but it already contained the emotional territory she would explore for the rest of her life. Then, during her final year at Menlo Atherton High School in California, she noticed a young musician named Lindsey Buckingham playing "California Dreamin'" at a gathering. Stevie joined him without being invited, adding her harmony to his voice. Lindsey did not stop her. That simple moment began one of the most important and painful partnerships in rock history. Lindsey later invited Stevie to join his band, Fritz. They were not yet the famous couple people would eventually argue about and analyze. They were young performers playing small venues, learning how to command rooms that did not know their names. Fritz eventually opened concerts for artists, including Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin. Stevie watched Janis closely, studying the way she could take possession of a stage without asking anyone's permission. After Fritz broke apart, Stevie and Lindsey became both a musical duo and a romantic couple. They left college behind and moved toward Los Angeles, convinced that their songs could build a future for them. The future did not arrive quickly. Their only album as Buckingham Nicks was released in September 1973. The cover showed them young, exposed, and serious, as though success were already waiting just beyond the camera. Inside were intricate guitar parts, close harmonies, and early signs of the sound that would later help transform Fleetwood Mac. The record failed commercially. Their label dropped them. Money disappeared. Lindsey became ill with mononucleosis, and Stevie took whatever work she could find. She waited tables and cleaned houses while Lindsey remained home, practicing guitar and working on arrangement. She later remembered returning from her waitress job with enough money to help pay for their house, car, and food. There was nothing glamorous about those years. Stevie wore ordinary uniforms instead of flowing stage clothes. She carried plates instead of a tambourine. She finished shifts knowing that the album she had believed in was already being treated as a failure. Lindsey sometimes questioned why she seemed happy after work. Stevie's answer was practical. She had been around real people, and she had earned enough money to keep them going. Still, doubt was growing. In 1973, while Lindsey was away rehearsing with Don Everly, Stevie stayed in Aspen, Colorado. She looked at the mountains and began thinking about how quickly everything could come down. Buckingham Nicks had failed. She was approaching her mid-20s, supporting two people, and wondering whether she should return to school and choose a safer life. Sitting in that uncertainty, she wrote, "Landslide." The song did not come from fame. It came from the fear that fame might never happen. Stevie decided to give their dream a little more time. She did not know that producer Keith Olsen would eventually play a Buckingham Nicks recording for Fleetwood Mac drummer Mick Fleetwood. She did not know that Lindsey would soon receive an invitation that could change everything. Most importantly, she did not know that Lindsey would refuse to go without her. At the end of 1974, Stevie Nicks was still a struggling singer whose only album had disappeared from the charts. Within months, millions of people would hear her voice. but the opportunity that rescued her career would also place her love, her privacy, and eventually her health under pressures she could not yet imagine. On New Year's Eve in 1974, Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham officially joined Fleetwood Mac. For Stevie, it looked like the rescue she had been waiting for. She no longer had to clean houses or carry plates while wondering whether anyone would ever hear her songs. But Fleetwood Mac was not a new band waiting to be built around them. It already had a history, an audience, and musicians with strong opinions about how it should sound. Mick Fleetwood had first been interested in Lindsey's guitar playing. Lindsey made it clear that he and Stevie were a package. Mick then had to consider whether Christine McVie, the band's keyboard player and one of its principal songwriters, would accept another woman in the group. The two women met over dinner. Stevie later remembered understanding that Christine's approval mattered. Christine was not looking for competition or unnecessary tension. She wanted to know whether she could live, travel, rehearse, and work beside Stevie for months at a time. By the end of the evening, Christine reportedly liked her. That decision changed the history of the band. The new lineup began recording an album simply called Fleetwood Mac. Lindsey brought careful arrangements and an intense approach to production. Stevie arrived with songs she had carried through the difficult Buckingham Nicks years, including Rhiannon and Landslide. When the album was released in July 1975, it did not become an immediate sensation. Its rise was gradual. Radio stations began playing Christine's Over My Head and Say You Love Me. Then listeners discovered Stevie's voice. Rhiannon sounded unlike the usual songs on American radio. Stevie sang about a mysterious woman who seemed impossible to possess. On stage, the song became even more dramatic. Under the lights, Stevie moved in flowing black clothing as the band pushed the music harder behind her. By the final minutes, the controlled studio recording had turned into something raw and unpredictable. The image that would define her career was beginning to appear. Her clothes were not chosen by accident. Stevie worked with designer Margie Kent to create a look that could remain recognizable as she grew older. Long skirts, shawls, platform boots, and fitted tops. She understood that audiences did not only hear a performer, they remembered a silhouette. The album eventually reached #1 in the United States. Only a short time earlier, Stevie had been wondering whether she should return to school. Now, strangers were arriving at concerts dressed like her. Success, however, did not repair what was happening between Stevie and Lindsey. They had spent years depending on each other for almost everything. They had written together, struggled together, and entered Fleetwood Mac together. Once the band became successful, the relationship that had survived poverty began to collapse. They still had to work in the same room. By early 1976, Fleetwood Mac was preparing a follow-up album while nearly every relationship inside the band was breaking apart. John and Christine McVie were ending their marriage. Mick Fleetwood was dealing with the failure of his own marriage. Stevie and Lindsey were no longer able to continue as a couple. There was no opportunity for a clean separation. They could not divide their belongings and disappear into different lives. Their jobs required them to stand only a few feet apart, listening as the other person turned private anger into music. The sessions took place largely in California, including months at the record plant in Sausalito. The studio had no windows in the main recording room. Days and nights blurred together. The musicians worked for long hours, slept irregularly, argued over arrangements, and returned the following day because the album still had to be completed. Lindsey brought in Go Your Own Way, a sharp account of the breakup from his perspective. Stevie disliked one of its accusations, but she still had to sing harmony on the recording. Her response was quieter. One day, Stevie went into another room at the studio where a keyboard was waiting. She wrote Dreams in roughly 10 minutes, then returned and played it for the band. Instead of attacking Lindsey directly, the song warned him that loneliness would eventually arrive. The band recorded it, and Dreams became Fleetwood Mac's only #1 single on the Billboard Hot 100. Stevie also wrote Silver Springs, another song inspired by the breakup. She believed deeply in it, but the group left it off the final album because of time limitations on the vinyl record. It appeared instead as the B-side to Go Your Own Way. For Stevie, the decision felt deeply personal. One of her most emotional songs had been removed, while Lindsay's version of their breakup became a major single. Released in February 1977, Rumors became a worldwide phenomenon. It spent months at the top of the charts, won the Grammy Award for Album of the Year, and eventually sold tens of millions of copies. Audiences heard polished harmonies and unforgettable melodies. The people making them were barely holding their relationships together. Night after night, Stevie stood across from Lindsay and sang words written during the end of their love affair. The pain did not remain hidden behind the music. It became the music. And as Rumors turned Stevie Nicks into one of the most recognizable women in rock, success gave her something she had never possessed before: the power to build a career outside Fleetwood Mac. That freedom would produce her greatest solo triumph. It would also bring her closer to the habit that nearly destroyed her. By the end of the 1970s, Stevie Nicks had more songs than Fleetwood Mac could record. Each songwriter competed for space on an album. Lindsey Buckingham brought his material. Christine McVie brought hers. Stevie might arrive with a notebook full of songs, only to learn that 2 or 3 would be selected. The rest remained on cassette tapes or inside boxes, waiting for a future that might never come. She did not originally see herself leaving Fleetwood Mac. She wanted another place where those songs could live. In 1980, Stevie began recording her first solo album with producer Jimmy Iovine. She assembled musicians who would give her work a different identity, including guitarist Waddy Wachtel and members of Tom Petty's Heartbreakers. The goal was not to imitate Fleetwood Mac. Stevie wanted to discover whether the audience would still listen when her voice stood at the center. Belladonna was released on July 27, 1981. The album reached #1 in the United States and produced 4 major singles. Stop Draggin' My Heart Around, recorded with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, introduced her solo career to radio. Leather and Lace, sung with Don Henley, revealed a softer intimacy. Edge of 17 carried a harder rhythm, and one of the most recognizable guitar lines of the decade. Stevie had achieved something few artists manage. She belonged to one of the biggest bands in the world, yet she had also created a successful identity outside it. That freedom came with an exhausting schedule. Fleetwood Mac still required albums, rehearsals, interviews, and long tours. Her solo career demanded the same things. Stevie moved between recording studios, hotel rooms, limousines, backstage areas, and arenas where thousands expected her to become the mysterious woman they had paid to see. Cocaine had already become common around Fleetwood Mac during the Rumors years. At first, it seemed tied to the pace of the work. It kept people awake during recording sessions and extended celebrations after concerts. Over time, Stevie's use became more dangerous. The drug did not care that she was famous. By the mid-1980s, her body was warning her. She had damaged the inside of her nose so severely that a doctor told her continued cocaine use could cause a potentially fatal medical crisis. Stevie later spoke without romanticizing that period. She understood that she had reached a point where another tour or another night of excess could end very differently. In 1986, after completing the Rock a Little tour, she checked herself into the Betty Ford Center. She made the decision herself. For a woman whose public image suggested mystery and control, entering treatment required admitting that control had already been lost. The flowing dresses, gold records, and sold-out shows could not protect her from what was happening inside her body. She completed treatment and stopped using cocaine. It should have marked the end of the most dangerous chapter of her life. Instead, another dependency began quietly through a prescription. A psychiatrist prescribed medication intended to help prevent a return to cocaine. Eventually, Stevie was taking Klonopin, a benzodiazepine commonly used for anxiety and seizure disorders. Because it came from a doctor, the danger did not initially look the same. There were no secret purchases or lines on a dressing room table. There were pills, instructions, and the belief that she was following medical advice. Stevie later said the medication turned her into a different person. She continued recording and performing, but her energy faded. Her weight increased. Her memory of entire periods became unclear. She has said she remembers little of her 1989 tour. The woman known for filling notebooks with songs struggled to write, with the same urgency. From the outside, the career continued. She released albums, appeared with Fleetwood Mac, and walked onto stages beneath familiar lights. Inside, she felt increasingly disconnected from the person she had been. In late 1993, an accident at her home forced her to confront the problem. After taking medication and drinking wine, she fell, lost consciousness, and cut her forehead near a fireplace. Stevie later described the incident as the moment she knew the pills had taken control. She entered a hospital and endured a difficult detoxification that lasted 47 days. The withdrawal was physically and emotionally punishing. She later called the years on Klonopin a greater regret than cocaine, because the medication had taken nearly 8 years from her life. Cocaine had threatened to destroy her body. Klonopin had slowly dimmed her ambition, memory, and creativity while allowing her to believe she was safe. When Stevie finally emerged from treatment, she was alive and sober, but she could not simply return to the woman who had recorded Belladonna. The music industry had changed. Her confidence had been damaged. Critics were focusing on her appearance, and an album completed during the final period of her dependency was about to be released. Stevie Nicks had survived the drugs. Now she had to discover whether she could survive being seen again. Stevie Nicks had spent years proving that a woman could stand at the center of one of the biggest bands in the world without becoming smaller for the men around her. But success did not remove the private choices that followed her away from the stage. In 1979, Fleetwood Mac was still living under the enormous expectations created by rumors. Stevie was touring, recording the experimental double album Tusk, and beginning to imagine a solo career of her own. During that period, she became pregnant while involved with Eagles drummer and singer Don Henley. She chose to have an abortion. For decades, Stevie spoke about that decision with unusual directness. She did not present it as an easy moment, but she also refused to allow strangers to rewrite what her life had required. In a 2024 interview with CBS News, she said that continuing the pregnancy would have ended her place in Fleetwood Mac and likely changed the future of the band. She believed there was no realistic way to raise a child while living through the recording schedules, tours, internal conflicts, and constant travel that defined her career. The decision revealed a truth that women in rock rarely said aloud during the 1970s. Men could leave children at home and continue touring for months. A woman who became a mother was often expected to step away, slow down, or allow someone else to take her place. Stevie understood the cost. She had wanted the music since she was a teenager. She had waited tables, cleaned houses, survived commercial failure, and endured the collapse of her relationship with Lindsey Buckingham without leaving the band. By 1979, she was finally in a position no woman before her had occupied in quite the same way. Motherhood might have given her one life. The choice she made allowed her to continue the one she had already fought to build. Yet the absence of children did not mean Stevie lacked a maternal side. Friends often described her as protective and generous. She surrounded herself with godchildren, nieces, young musicians, assistants, and animals. She created extended families wherever she went, perhaps because the conventional version of home had never fit easily beside her career. The deepest test of that instinct came through her closest friend, Robin Snyder Anderson. Stevie had known Robin since their teenage years. Robin had been there before Fleetwood Mac, before the costumes, before the money, and before Stevie's name appeared above arena entrances. She belonged to the part of Stevie's life that fame could not manufacture. While Stevie was recording Belladonna, Fon Fi, Fon Antoine Tronenki, Robin was diagnosed with leukemia. The illness progressed rapidly. Robin became pregnant during her treatment and gave birth to a son named Matthew. Soon afterward, in October 1982, she died. Stevie was devastated. She had achieved the solo success she once dreamed about. But the person she wanted beside her was no longer there to see it continue. Robin left behind her husband, Kim Anderson, and an infant child. In the confusion of grief, Stevie became convinced that she was supposed to help hold the broken family together. She decided to marry Kim. There was no long courtship and no great romance behind the ceremony. Stevie later admitted that they married because they were grieving and because caring for Matthew seemed like the only meaningful action available to them. She believed, at the time, that Robin might have wanted her to help raise the baby. The marriage took place in January 1983. Almost immediately, Stevie realized that grief had pushed two people into a life neither of them truly wanted. Kim was mourning his wife. Stevie was mourning her best friend. The baby could not transform that shared pain into love. They separated after only a few months. Stevie later called the marriage a terrible mistake, not because she regretted caring about Matthew, but because she understood that she had tried to solve death by replacing what had been lost. Robin had been her friend. Kim had been Robin's husband. No ceremony could recreate the family that leukemia had destroyed. Stevie never married again. She continued to work, tour, write songs, and build a life that did not resemble the domestic future many people expected a woman to want. She occasionally wondered what motherhood might have looked like, but she did not publicly reduce her life to regret. Her choices had consequences. So would every alternative. That may be the most painful part of Stevie Nicks' private story. She did not lose a traditional family through one dramatic betrayal. She repeatedly stood at points where no choice could preserve everything. She could remain inside the music, but she could not promise herself an ordinary home. She could try to care for her best friend's child, but she could not become the woman who had died. And while audiences saw Stevie surrounded by musicians, assistants, and thousands of devoted fans, some of the most important rooms in her life still contained an empty place. Robin's death had shown Stevie that success could not keep the people she loved alive. In the years ahead, that lesson would return again and again. For most of Stevie Nicks' life, music had given her a way to preserve people. A relationship could end, a friendship could change, or an entire decade could disappear, but a song allowed her to return to the feeling. She could place someone inside a melody and carry that person from one stage to the next. As she grew older, however, the losses became harder to contain inside music. Her mother, Barbara Nicks, had been one of the strongest forces behind the woman Stevie became. While Stevie's father moved the family from city to city for work, Barbara created stability inside each new house. She encouraged her daughter's imagination, filled her childhood with fairy tales, and accepted the theatrical clothes and mysterious characters Stevie later brought to the stage. Barbara also remained practical. She understood that her daughter's life would never follow an ordinary pattern. Stevie might spend months traveling, sleep through the afternoon after a concert, or arrive home carrying notebooks filled with songs no one else had heard. Barbara did not always understand the machinery of the music business, but she understood Stevie. Barbara died in December 2011 at the age of 84. Stevie temporarily stepped away from performing while grieving. According to accounts she later shared, her mother had encouraged her to return to the road rather than remain at home surrounded by sadness. The advice was consistent with the woman who had watched Stevie build a career through movement. Remaining still would not bring Barbara back. Fleetwood Macnews.com, https www.fleetwoodmacnews.com 2012-6 Pumped Up Nicks after brief hiatus. HTML UTM source ChatGPT.com. Stevie returned to work, but another devastating loss arrived in October 2017 when Tom Petty died at the age of 66. Tom had been more than a famous collaborator. When Stevie was preparing her first solo album, she had wanted badly to become part of the Heartbreakers. Tom did not simply give her membership in his band, but he gave her something almost as important: musical friendship. "Stop Draggin' My Heart Around" became one of the defining songs of Belladonna. Stevie later toured and performed with Tom, sang Needles and Pins beside him, and repeatedly described the Heartbreakers as the band she wished she could join. Their friendship lasted for decades. Tom could be direct with her in a way few people were. He offered advice without appearing impressed by the mythology surrounding Stevie Nicks. When she struggled creatively, he reminded her to stop waiting for inspiration to arrive in some perfect form and simply begin writing. After his death, Stevie said her heart would never recover completely. While accepting an honor with Fleetwood Mac at the 2018 MusiCares Gala, she used part of her speech to remember him. The event was supposed to celebrate her band, yet Tom's absence remained impossible to ignore. Latums come, HTTs, Sendawi, TT, www, Latums come, entertainment, music, Chai, Lay, Ete Stevie, Nicks, Tom Petty, 2801 Tartar 221.7 story. Mel, UTM source, Chatterty ChatGPT. Com, she began performing Free Fallin' in his memory. On stage, photographs of Tom appeared behind her. Audiences often sang along, but Stevie was not performing the song as a casual cover. She was standing inside a friendship that could no longer continue anywhere except through music. Then, on November 30th, 2022, Christine McVie died. The loss reached into an even older part of Stevie's life. When Stevie first entered Fleetwood Mac, Christine had been the established woman in the band. She could have treated the younger American singer as competition. Instead, she accepted her. Through breakups, tours, arguments, changing lineups, and years apart, their relationship developed into something rare inside a band famous for conflict. They were different. Christine often appeared calm and grounded behind her keyboards. Stevie moved across the stage in shawls and platform boots. Christine wrote direct, melodic songs such as Songbird and You Make Loving Fun. Stevie filled hers with dreams, symbols, and characters who seemed to belong to another world. Together, they helped create space for each other. After Christine's death, Stevie described her as her musical soulmate, her best friend, and the older sister she never had. 2 years later, she said the loss still left her feeling empty. She missed Christine's humor, her conversation, and the simple knowledge that someone who understood the entire Fleetwood Mac journey was still alive. People, com, HTTPS, treat people. Com, Stevie Nicks still feels empty too. Years after Christine McVie death, exclusive 8757627. UTM source, ChatGPT, com. Christine's death also ended something larger. When Stevie was asked whether Fleetwood Mac could tour again, her answer was clear. She saw no reason to continue without Christine because she could not be replaced. The group had survived departures before, but this absence changed its identity. ABC News, com. HTTPS, Yeet, ABC News. Com, GMA, Culture, Stevie Nicks, Sees, Reason, Continue, Fleetwood, McAfter, Story. ID 123669033 Dane UTM Source ChatGPT com. Stevie continued performing alone, carrying Fleetwood Mac songs into her solo concerts. Yet every familiar introduction now held another memory. Landslide no longer belonged only to the young woman in Aspen. Free Fallin' carried Tom. Christine's songs belonged to a voice that would never return to the stage beside her. In 2025, Stevie fractured her shoulder and had to postpone several concerts while she recovered. At 77, the injury was another reminder that returning to the road now required more than determination. Her body needed time that a younger Stevie might once have refused to give it. rp.org, http t www.rp.org, to entertainment, Shitri music, Stevie Nicks postpones tour. UTM source, ChatGPT.com. She eventually returned. But when Stevie Nicks walked back beneath the lights, she was no longer accompanied by many of the people who had helped her reach them. The audiences were still there. The songs were still there. And Stevie had become the person responsible for carrying almost everyone home. For decades, Stevie Nicks appeared to move through time differently from everyone around her. The black dresses remained. The platform boots remained. When the lights fell across the stage and the opening notes of Gold Dust Woman began, audiences could still recognize her from a silhouette alone. But the woman inside that silhouette was growing older. Stevie never pretended that performing in her 70s felt the same as it had during the Rumors years. Touring required more preparation, longer recovery, and an awareness that one injury could rearrange months of carefully planned shows. In 2019, she received one of the greatest honors of her career when she entered the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a solo artist. Fleetwood Mac had already been inducted in 1998. The second recognition made Stevie the first woman inducted into the institution twice. Harry Styles introduced her that evening, representing a generation born long after Rhiannon and Dreams first reached the radio. That moment said something important about her survival. Stevie was no longer being celebrated only by the listeners who had followed her through the 1970s. Younger artists had grown up studying her songwriting, her clothing, her independence, and the way she had refused to disappear as the music industry changed around her. She could have treated that recognition as a final chapter. Instead, she kept working. In 2024, Stevie released The Lighthouse, her first newly written solo song in several years. The idea came after the United States Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. She wrote from the perspective of a woman who had lived through a time when reproductive choices were even more restricted, and who believed those choices were once again in danger. According to Stevie, the song came together quickly once she sat down to write it. Recording the song required her to revisit her own decision from 1979. She could have protected herself by remaining quiet. At her age, and with her reputation already secure, there was little professional advantage in entering a divisive public debate. Yet Stevie had never built her career by avoiding uncomfortable subjects. Her most famous songs had come from breakups, jealousy, fear, ambition, and choices that left no one completely unharmed. The Lighthouse showed that she was still willing to write about the world outside her memories. She performed the song on Saturday Night Live in October 2024, returning to the program decades after her earlier appearance. The voice was older and deeper, but it still carried the rough edge that made it immediately recognizable. She was not attempting to imitate the young woman who had sung Stand Back in the 1980s. She was allowing the audience to hear what time had done. Then, her body forced her to stop. In the summer of 2025, Stevie announced that she had fractured her shoulder and needed to postpone several concerts scheduled for August and September. The dates were moved to later in the year while she recovered. At 77, a serious shoulder injury could not be treated as a minor interruption between shows. For fans, the announcement raised an uncomfortable question. How many more times could Stevie return? The question was understandable. But Stevie did not describe the injury as a farewell. She apologized for the postponements and said she looked forward to seeing the audiences when she was able to perform again. Months later, she walked onto the stage at Barclays Center in Brooklyn. Approximately 17,000 people filled the arena. Some had followed her since Fleetwood Mac. Others arrived wearing shawls and dark clothing inspired by a style created before they were born. Stevie spoke openly about the accident, told stories between songs, and performed material from both her solo career and the band that had changed her life. She was not moving as she had at 30. She did not need to. The audience was no longer watching only for the turns, the flowing fabric, or the mysterious woman who once seemed to appear from another world. They were watching a survivor who had returned after addiction, grief, fractured relationships, medical treatment, and now physical injury. In April 2026, Stevie returned for more performances, including shows in Oklahoma, Texas, and at the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival. At 78, she was still choosing the road, even when each return required more from her than the one before. There will eventually be a final concert. Stevie knows that. Her audience knows it too. But that night has not yet been announced. For now, the boots are still waiting backstage. The shawls are still being lifted from their cases. And somewhere beyond the curtain, another audience is waiting to hear the voice that time changed, but never managed to silence. The larger question is no longer whether Stevie Nicks can remain the woman she was in 1977. It is what her songs will become when she is no longer there to sing them herself. At 78, Stevie Nicks no longer needs another hit record to prove that she mattered. Her career has already lasted longer than many of the relationships, record companies, musical trends, and radio formats that once surrounded it. The young woman who wondered whether she should abandon music and return to school became one of the few artists whose songs continue to reach listeners who were not alive when they were recorded. That survival is visible in dreams. When Fleetwood Mac released the song in 1977, it became the band's only #1 single in the United States. More than 4 decades later, it returned to the charts after a video of Nathan Apodaca riding a skateboard, drinking cranberry juice, and listening to the song spread across social media. The video contained no explanation of Fleetwood Mac, no history of rumors, and no account of the breakup that inspired the lyrics. It simply allowed a younger generation to hear Stevie's voice. They responded immediately. Stevie admitted that the renewed attention surprised her. She later joined the trend herself, sitting beside a piano as she laced a pair of roller skates while Dreams played. A song written in approximately 10 minutes during one of the most painful periods of her relationship with Lindsey Buckingham had found another life in a world neither of them could have imagined in 1977. Her influence also became clear through the artists who followed her. When Stevie entered the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a solo performer in 2019, Harry Styles delivered the induction speech. Fleetwood Mac had already entered the institution in 1998, making Stevie the first woman honored twice. Styles spoke about the way her songs crossed generations and made listeners feel understood, even when the woman singing them had never met the people hearing them. That connection may explain why her audience now contains several different versions of the same listener. There are people who first heard Rhiannon on the radio in the 1970s. There are women who bought Belladonna in 1981 and saw in Stevie a performer who could build a successful career without leaving her band. There are daughters who discovered her records through their mothers, and younger fans who first encountered her music through television, streaming services, or a short video on a telephone screen. They do not all remember the same Stevie. Some remember the woman turning beneath stage lights in flowing sleeves. Others remember Stand Back, Edge of 17, or the reunion performance of Silver Springs, when she stared directly at Lindsey and sang words written years earlier. Younger listeners may know her as an influence on artists they already admire, but they recognize the same voice. That voice is rougher now. Time has lowered it, and decades of touring have changed its edges. Stevie no longer needs to reproduce every note exactly as it sounded on the original records. The audience understands that the years inside the songs now belong to the performance. When she sings Landslide, she is no longer the frightened young woman looking at the mountains in Aspen and wondering whether she had chosen the wrong life. She is singing with the knowledge of what followed. Fleetwood Mac, Rumors, Addiction, Recovery, Robin, Tom Petty, Christine McVie, her mother, the relationships that ended, and the stages that remained. Christine's death removed the possibility of another complete Fleetwood Mac chapter. Stevie has said that Christine could not be replaced, and that she saw no reason for the band to continue without the woman she considered her musical soulmate. The official Fleetwood Mac story may be over. Stevie's own ending remains unwritten. Her official website currently lists no upcoming concerts, but it contains no retirement announcement. An empty tour calendar is not the same as a farewell, especially for an artist whose career has repeatedly stopped and started around albums, injuries, treatment, grief, and recovery. One day, however, the boots will remain inside their box. The shawls will no longer be carried toward a dressing room, and an audience will hear "Landslide," knowing Stevie Nicks will not walk onto the stage to sing it. That is the heartbreak beneath her story. She survived long enough to become the keeper of songs connected to people she could not keep. Every performance now carries voices that are gone, relationships that could not last, and younger versions of herself that exist only in photographs and recordings. Yet when the first notes begin, none of them feels completely lost. Which Stevie Nicks song brings back the strongest memory for you? Is it Dreams, Rhiannon, Edge of 17, Silver Springs, or Landslide? Share that memory in the comments and subscribe for more stories about the artists whose music became part of our own lives.